Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. On Thursday, the Kremlin fired a new intermediate-range hypersonic missile at Ukraine. The missile travels at 10 times the speed of sound and, according to Putin, cannot be stopped by defenders. Apart from its speed, the missile carries 6 non-nuclear warheads, each releasing 6 submunitions, the effect being likened to a nuclear attack. This launch comes after the use by Ukraine of US and UK missiles on Russian territory and the provision of anti-personnel mines to Ukraine by President Biden. NATO and Ukraine will hold emergency talks on Tuesday to agree a response. To discuss this dramatic escalation in the war, I am delighted to welcome Sergei Erofeev. He's a sociologist at Rutgers University. Sergei, welcome back to TVP World. Thank you for taking the time.
Hi, Ashim. Good to be with you.
Good to see you. So tell me, Sergei, Putin called this an unstoppable missile. What does he mean?
Well, there is nothing new about this unstoppable missile. We have known how these things work since the times of Reagan and Gorbachev and earlier. Once such missiles enter the open space, they can be stopped midway. It's indeed very difficult to stop ballistic missiles once they approach the target at the lower atmosphere. But this has never been fired in a practical combat. We know that. Long range is easier to fight against, but intermediate range is obviously harder. But when Putin talks about unbelievable new level of speed, hypersonic speed, it's still the same game of muscle flexing. He's not telling anything new. The thing is that in this situation, the escalation may lead to Ukraine and her Western allies to actually hit the targets in Russia, which operate such missiles.
Right. Okay. So I mean, clearly something has changed, hasn't it? After the firing of this missile, the Ukrainian government has asked for urgent talks with NATO, and those are taking place on Tuesday. So you say that this missile is nothing new, but well, there must be something different. What is it?
Well, the different thing is the next step in Putin's game. The game is called impression management. So this is the guy who will never use nuclear weapons on the actual battlefield because he knows perfectly well that there will be a response. He wants to live a beautiful life, engage in conspicuous consumption, and continue like that until he's really cornered. He's not going to be cornered in Ukraine, even if he has to withdraw from the country. So there is no question of using real nuclear warheads. What he wants to do is to demonstrate his muscles. And in that respect, he's very inventive and can be very sophisticated. But this type of behavior, I think, should be described as kind of maniacal, sophisticated and maniacal elusiveness. So he knows perfectly well that after one step, when he doesn't make the right impression, he can still take another step. So it's just one of the many steps along the way. Let's remember other things like...
Yes, but what are they going to talk about, NATO and the Ukrainian government?
Well, you just quoted the British who say that if it's necessary to war now, our soldiers will be fighting now. So Putin, I think, realizes more and more that there will be an adequate response to his action, and that he doesn't impress the Western counterparts as much as he hoped at the very beginning. But he is a captive of his own behavior. He has to behave that way. even if he understands that the Americans and the Europeans are not going to be really so easily succumbing to his muscle flexing. But he has to continue. One should really understand that. This is going to continue and continue. That's his line of behavior until he's pushed out of Ukraine. But pushing him out of Ukraine would have been possible already 2+ years ago if his game was understood very clearly from the very beginning without engaging in the tactics which we call too little, too late.
Right. Well, apart from the meeting on Tuesday, NATO Secretary General Rutte went to meet President Trump. This was an unexpected, unplanned, so far as we are aware, meeting. Again, things seem to be happening behind the scenes. What do you think that was all about?
Well, one of the things which are very important for Trump, who positions himself as a great deal maker, he's probably not. He's primarily a showman. Showmanship is the number one thing about Trump and whatever he does in the sphere of politics. But he really thinks of himself highly as a deal maker, and as such, he promised that he would stop the war very quickly. Okay, it may be a truce, which is just a ceasefire along certain lines, and Trump may really pursue that goal. But also the thing about Trump is that, which is the only predictable thing, that he's unpredictable. And being such a person, he may actually take certain steps which would be in favor of Ukraine, but the trick is we simply don't know what they can be. He's the one who used to admire Putin for certain things, because like Putin, Trump would like to have it all with impunity. So this is a source of admiration, because Putin can stay in power endlessly and do whatever he wants with impunity, so to speak. Trump cannot do that, but if the factor of fear for Trump is much, much lower than for Putin. Trump knows that after 4 years, he will have to step down. There's no question about that. So there might be some persecution, and he can get into more trouble with the legal system.
Right.
But the consequences are no comparison with what are the fears of Mr. Putin.
Understood. Now, Rutte and Trump apparently had a good rapport during Trump's previous term as president. Do you believe that that rapport continues and that Rutte will be able to influence Trump and his attitude towards NATO's responsibilities in Europe?
Well, that rapport on the part of Trump is a part of his showmanship. He can possibly try and do something along those lines, but he can hardly talk to Putin in the same way as he did in Helsinki some years ago. What he can try and do is to tell Putin, stop fighting on certain conditions. We know what Putin wants. Whether or not Trump will agree to Putin's demands is not completely clear. And then the institutions have to step in. And of course, the role of the European nations will be extremely important there. And I'm not sure that Trump can ignore that.
Understood. Now, Putin says that the reason he launched this hypersonic missile was because, the US and the UK, President Biden, of course, and Keir Starmer allowed Ukraine to fire their missiles, into Russian territory. Now, whether that's the reason or not remains to be seen. But why did President Biden give permission to Ukraine at this late stage, just as he was on his way out?
This is a very characteristic of Western leaders' behavior. This is a fine line between behaving as civilized politicians and behaving as cowards. So between civilized way and cowardly way, there's a very fine line, and Biden's behavior has been very exemplary of that. He does not really want to get into much trouble on the basis of the wrong understanding of Putin's rule and Putin's war, although he understands maybe slightly better than some other politicians. But that's the reality. The main decision makers in the West are afraid of escalation, which results in the fact that they, after all, do what needs to be done. But again, as I said, it's very often too little, too late. So Putin could not take this step. And he took the step. But again, it's very helpful at this stage. And Putin had to react in a very standard way to save his own face. So once this was enacted and the first ATACMS or storm shadows hit the Russian territory, Putin had to act in response to that. But we should understand it very clearly. It's just for trying to save his face, not actually for succeeding in the whole long story of this war. The long story of this war is that he will be defeated. In what form, at what cost, at what time, we don't know. But in the long run, he's against history, whereas Ukraine is on the right side.
Do you believe that this show of force or this escalation on Putin's part before President Trump comes in is really designed to set Putin in a stronger negotiating position in any talks that may happen after Trump takes up his position as president?
Well, what can be very strong about his negotiation position? The Ukrainian troops are still in Kursk. The Russian troops are not advancing very fast. And the whole point about the new allowances for the Ukrainian troops is that this may help to slow down further advances of the Russian troops, which makes Putin's position not very powerful in terms of possible negotiations. But what negotiations? The negotiations can only be about temporary ceasefire. And Ukrainians and more Europeans understand that this is not a solution. In the end, the only negotiation type that can be conducted with Putin, considering his true nature as not a politician but as a gangster, is negotiations from the position of strength. So one day it may come, but we all would like to avoid the Munich II scenario when too much has to be paid for solving the whole problem, like it happened with Hitler.
Do you think Ukraine's actually going to be asking NATO for some more tangible help on the ground at this meeting?
Well, I'm not a military expert, but I think it's quite clear for everyone that the modern technology, conventional arms, which are in possession of Western allies of Ukraine, allow Ukraine, if it's enabled enough, to totally defeat Putin. Of course, the main problem of Ukrainians is the manpower, because the country is going through a very serious fatigue and exhaustion of this manpower on the battlefield. The boots on the ground from the Western allies is still a very undesirable scenario. But if Ukraine is supplied with enough long-range weapons, then it could be probably a very serious deterrent for the Russian attack on the Ukrainian territory. In the end, it may be a game changer. At the moment, nobody seriously looks at that as a game changer. But again, it's a long war, and a lot will depend on whether the Ukrainian morale can be boosted. And that depends in many ways on stronger support from Ukraine's allies.
Understood. Now, you mentioned manpower, and we've all heard about the 10,000 North Korean troops that have been drafted into the Kursk region. Many are still being trained, but some of them are actually fighting. And from apparently a military source at Ukraine's general staff, as quoted by Reuters, said that Ukraine has lost more than 40% of the territory in Russia's Kursk region that it seized in August, simply because Russia is launching waves of attack. Now, what could Ukraine do? I mean, it seems not to have been successful in diverting Russian soldiers to that region. All that Putin has done is brought in some North Koreans.
Well, we still continue thinking of the Kursk territory, the part which is taken by the Ukrainians as a negotiation chip. In that sense, it's of course very important. But as long as the Ukrainians hold a little bit of that land, that will remain that kind of negotiation chip. But the whole story will not be probably solved in Kursk. The whole story depends on the overall capabilities of the Ukrainian army and higher morale, which needs to be restored among Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian population in general.
Indeed.
So, yeah, but what is going on with the use of Koreans is obviously a sign of weakness for Putin. And we don't know whether it will turn to a good end for him.
Well, we shall be finding out quite a few things, the outcomes of the meetings that are taking place next week. And I'm sure that we'll be meeting again, Sergei, for your analysis of those. Meantime, thank you very much for taking the time tonight.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. We'll be right back.